Having me. I'm Julia Nelson, and I'm a bioinformatics analyst with clinicaltrials.gov. So I'm here to talk about the availability of trial results in clinicaltrials.gov and PubMed index publications by funding type. So our work had two key objectives. The first was to examine results availability overall by data source within clinicaltrials.gov and within PubMed indexed publications. And second was to look at the time to results availability overall and by key funder type. We define these as NIH, non-NIH, US federal agency, industry, and then other. So some quick background, clinicaltrials.gov as a results database was mandated by the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007. It was launched in 2008 and is a place for tabular data on study participants, outcomes, and adverse events to be reported. The final rule became effective in 2017 and basically expanded registration results submission requirements. PubMed acts as a database for the search and retrieval of biomedical life sciences literature. It's been online since 1996 and today contains more than 34 million citations and abstracts of biomedical literature. So our data set, we obtained our sample on August 1st, 2021 of clinicaltrials.gov registered trials with at least one US location that were initiated on or after January 1st, 2015, and with the primary completion date up to August 1st, 2018. From that overall population of 9,102 records, we conducted random samplings. We would have 100 from each of the four key funder types, NIH, non-NIH, US federal agency, industry, and other. The primary completion date of August 1st, 2018 was selected, so there would be at least 36 months from trial primary completion date to our results search. And January 1st, 2015 was chosen as the trial initiation date, so there would be a more recent sample of trials in our record. So from August 6th to October 8th, 2021, we had 4 independent reviewers that searched for PubMed index publications reporting primary outcomes. Publications of meta-analyses or protocols were not considered for the purposes of our work. These methods were based on previous work with similar methodologies. First, we searched within the clinicaltrials.gov record for a linked publication. And then if it wasn't there, we went into PubMed and searched by NCT number. And then finally, within PubMed by study title. We had a 5th reviewer that resolved any ambiguities that came up. And the date the publication was first available, whether online or in print, was what was used for our analysis. So the median follow-up time from the primary completion date to our results search was 47.8 months. So of the 400 records in our sample, after at least 36 months from the primary completion date, results were available for 245 or 61% of trials. Of these 245, a little over half had results available only in a PubMed index publication. 25% had results only in clinicaltrials.gov, with the remaining in both. And then we broke this down by funding type. So with NIH funded trials, 60% had results available. Non-NIH US federal agencies had 71% available. Industry funded trials, 50% had results available, and then other was 64%. And then further looking into where these results were available, you can see clinicaltrials.gov only is in the blue, PubMed only is in the purple, both is in green. And of note, federally funded trials, both NIH and non-NIH were more likely to report in both clinicaltrials.gov and in a PubMed index publication, whereas others you can see are more predominantly reported only in a PubMed index publication. So then moving into the time to results availability, we saw that 40% of trial results were available first in clinicaltrials.gov. And that follows with the median time from the primary completion date to results availability in clinicaltrials.gov was 18.8 months, whereas for PubMed index publications, that was 25.6 months. So overall, the median time from the primary completion date to results availability was 22.1 months. So we performed a Kaplan-Meier analysis to examine this time to results availability, stratified by key funding type. Hopefully you can see the colors. NIH is in orange, non-NIH US federal agencies in black, industry is in blue, and then other is in red. We performed a log-rank testing, which did find there was a statistically significant difference in the time to results availability by funding type. So overall, results were available for 61% of trials in our sample after at least 36 months from the primary completion date. And including clinicaltrials.gov in your search for trial results will maximize the discovery of trial results beyond what's in publications, as 40% of results were first available in clinicaltrials.gov and 25% were only available in clinicaltrials.gov. We found a statistically significant difference in the time to results availability by key funder type. A recent article that came out looked at the time to results availability just in PubMed index publications in specialized studies and did not find any difference by funding type. So it's likely that the inclusion of clinicaltrials.gov in our results search could be driving what we're seeing today. One key thing to note is that regulations do play a key role in reporting results to clinicaltrials.gov. Overall with the final rule and specifically for federally funded trials, especially with NIH funded trials per the NIH policy on the dissemination of NIH funded clinical trial information. However, these became effective in 2017, which is in the middle of our sampling timeframe. So it's not telling the whole story for what we're seeing here today. So some strengths and limitations, we conducted a thorough search for PubMed index publications with 4 reviewers. Unfortunately, this was very labor intensive, which is what resulted in our limited sample size. However, by using random sampling, we were able to have a representative sample of our overall population. We did not restrict our sample by study phase or intervention type to provide a more general landscape of how trial reporting looks like today. Our sampling strategy was able to balance recent trials with sufficient time from the primary completion date for results publication, but this did exclude longer running trials from our sample. And finally, as noted before, changes in trial reporting requirements and specifically for NIH funded trials did occur in the middle of our sampling timeframe. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments? No comments, just questions. Sorry. And I actually want to ask you, you noted that there's some inconsistencies with your study and other studies that have looked at the difference in reporting of industry versus government funded trials, for example, and you said some of it might be regulatory reasons. Can you explore a little more on
Yeah,
why?
that study was recent and it was only in obstetric trials. So it's not a one-to-one comparison and it did only look at results in PubMed index publications. So again, we included clinicaltrials.gov in our search for results. So I think we're getting a more general landscape than just within publications.
Thanks. John?
Very interesting data. And indeed, there is some discrepancy with prior work. The trials, the way that you're selecting, as you say, you're excluding the long duration trials. Do you have a sense of whether this is like 60% or 80% of the trials? I'm trying to think how many trials would have enough time to both recruit and follow and finish, you know, within that relatively narrow time window. And whether really that's kind of an interaction effect with industry trials, because in terms of their recruitment and duration, they're very different compared to NIH trials. Right. Yeah, that's definitely something that we considered, which is why we did make sure we had like an even sampling of 100 from each funding type. I don't know the exact numbers of how many would not have been included by having longer durations. But with the nature of clinicaltrials.gov being a more kind of recent database, we didn't want to go too far back. So that's kind of was where we were stuck with, but we're hoping to kind of like keep this going forward, and then more of those will be included and we'll see. Thanks.
In the back there.
Hi, I'm Marina Breutman, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if, and this is a little bit far afield, but I'm sure you all have thought about it, the new guidance that has come out from the Office of Scientific and Technology Policy on getting research results, federally funded research results out to the public as quickly as possible. Have you all been thinking about that, and how do you think it might affect the reporting of trial results in the future?
Yeah, we didn't really consider that in our, but there's still always factors that influence between the time of when results are submitted versus when they're actually available to the public. So we use the date that results were first available to the public for both clinicaltrials.gov and publications. So it's the results first posted date. So regardless of when those trial results come into clinicaltrials.gov, it's really just when they actually go through the QC process then are posted that we're using. So getting more people to report the results quicker doesn't really change how long it's going to take probably through the QC process.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Cameron Abbasi from BMJ. Might be a slightly unfair question for you. When you find out that the results are available and they have not been reported, they're not on the database, what do you do? What action is taken, and has action been taken?
I mean, if
Are there
they're
any
in a-
examples?
I mean, if they're in like a publication, but they're
Yeah,
not in.
yeah.
Yeah, we don't do anything. I mean.
Right.
Like,
Why is
if-
that?
As discussed in the previous, session, that there has been some movement towards rectifying that within the NIH, and I can't speak to other federal agencies.
I'm not holding you personally responsible.
But we hope to, see improvements going forward. And as I said, our sampling was kind of in the middle of the, when the effective date came in for these policies for NIH. So we don't really know what it's going to look like going forward when our entire sample is all subject to that NIH policy.
Hoping for improvement.
Yeah,
Yes.
what we can all for.
Mike, for
Hi, Sam Hindle from Bio and Med Archive asks whether the research, and you in particular, would look at preprint servers for the results of trials, whether that opens up a new area for results reporting, that it's not a final publication.
Yeah, that was definitely discussed. We modeled our study on previous work, which is why we only looked at PubMed index publications, but it's definitely something that we would consider looking into going forward, and if that maybe changes what we're seeing here in the timeliness of trial reporting.
Thank you.
we have time for our last question.
Thank you for the great presentation. Kyung-Won Hong from University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. Based on my understanding, I think clinicaltrials.gov requires a submission of summary results within like 1 year of primary completion date. And your study suggests that median was over 1 year. So, and previous study also suggested the summary result was not, up to date per se. So I was wondering what needs to be done from clinicaltrials.gov perspectives to improve that rate and maybe, make investigators, compliant to that requirement.
Mhm. Yeah, since we did look at the date the results were first posted, we don't really know from this offhand when they were actually submitted to clinicaltrials.gov, because that's what's required is the 1 year is to be submitted. Also, there are extension requests which are possible, so we didn't consider that either in our work, but it's something to consider going forward.
Thank you.